Welcome to our podcast series, Friends of the Mountains, where we delve into the incredible work and inspiring stories of individuals dedicated to improving the lives of both mountains and their communities. I'm your host, Bharat, bringing you tales from the mountains every Friday.
I'm back again, yet with another episode of Friends of the Mountains. This is episode 2 about story of two brothers building their own community up in the mountains of Himalayas in Uttarakhand region, and they call their setup Tiny Farm Lab. This story is close to my heart because I have been a part of this community too, and I've always wanted to start a podcast of my own, but I never did. But after listening to their podcast, Tiny Farm Friends, it gave me a little push. I guess that's what I needed. So here I am. So I'm sitting here with my favorite people, Raghav and Ansh. They both are eco-conscious architects, but they don't limit themselves. They are more than they appear to be. I would say they are multi-talented. I met them in a small village up in the mountains of Himalayas in Uttarakhand as a volunteer helping them to build a tiny mud house, or the house of biomaterials as they call it. They both are founders of Tiny Farm Lab and they have an amazing podcast channel too, named Tiny Farm Friends. They are the most hardworking yet super fun people I know. They are the change makers. They see challenges as an opportunity to find solutions. And personally, they inspire me a lot. They are trying to build a self-sustainable and self-sufficient community in the mountains, and that is what makes them true friends of the mountains. So without further ado, let's hear from Raghav and Ansh.
Thank you, Bharat, for having us here, and thank you for such a kind introduction. And it is for people like you that we enjoy our work, what we do at Tiny Farm Lab. And we are so grateful that we got a chance to meet you last year and that we could forge a bond for life. So, yeah, hi, I am Raghav, and although people know me as an architect or natural builder, but I now associate myself as a multimedia creator so as to not limit myself. But apart from Tiny Farm Lab, you could find me hosting the Tiny Farm Friends podcast with Ansh. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, hi. Thank you once again. Yeah, I mean, we are we are so happy that you're starting this, and yeah, like this is going to be an amazing journey for you, and you have been part of ours. So the same joy I think we share in this as well. So yeah, hi, I'm Ansh, and I'm also an architect, at least by education. Now a natural builder. Also, I have an art practice, and yeah, like I create a lot of more things that just give me a lot of joy, I guess. Yeah.
Wonderful. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about Tiny Farm Lab a bit? What is it about and what is the intention behind starting Tiny Farm Lab?
Tiny Farm Lab started as a lifestyle choice, I would say.
Okay.
Like we both wanted to move to the mountains, and in the pandemic, we just had this, like, lot of us, we had that calling that what are we like to question ourselves and the decisions that we're making, the food that we eat,
Mm-hmm.
where we are spending the money, where we are spending the time. So we understood that in the past we have spent a lot of time in the mountains. So why not take that leap? Like we always think about it in our four walls that one day we'll move to the mountains, we'll live the mountain life and be friends of the mountains. But
That's
we don't
amazing.
take that leap. But we don't take that leap. So yeah, I mean, those things helped us, those questions and that time that pandemic gave us helped us to take this step. however long it was. Obviously, it was not a day, but yeah.
Wow. Raghu, do
Yeah,
you
I think
want
there
to
were
say
many.
something? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit on it. So there were a lot of tiny events that actually led up to this thing, what we now call as Tiny Farm Lab. And even before me quitting my job, we both had started this blog called Tiny AF. And it was about stories, how we could live our lives more intentionally and how we could create meaningful relationships. And we were always fascinated by the tiny house movement, and we both had our thesis along the similar topic. And so Tiny Farm Lab, we always thought it more than a design studio as a place for misfits, dreamers, and doers. A place, an interdisciplinary nexus for people from various fields, ranging from design, art, musicians, even alternate economists. So, and I think we've been able to achieve some of that
Mm-hmm.
because we've had people from all walks of life. So, for the last 2.5 years, this journey has been quite beautiful and rewarding.
So nice. So why don't you go ahead and tell us where is it, and just to paint a picture for our listeners.
So, Tiny Farm Lab, the physical part, or as we call the headquarters of the Tiny Farm Friends or TFFs, it's located in the remote forests of Rishikesh. So it's basically in the woods. It's off grid in some sense, not in the sense that it doesn't have electricity and all that, but it is an off grid place. So one has to take like a 15-minute ride outside Rishikesh, and then from the last motorable point, one has to walk 2 kilometers after crossing a beautiful junction where the transparent waters of Havel River meet the emerald blue waters of the Ganges, and then you take a walk across the Ganges through the forest until you reach Tiny Farm Lab, and it's in a village, a very quaint village with just 6 houses, and I think the seventh one we were building, and since we have been there, I think two more have been added. So by the villagers, so you could call it under 10 still, but yeah, it's a tiny village apt for a tiny farm lab studio.
That's wonderful.
So, when exactly did you decide to move to mountains?
And like what was the reaction at home when you broke the news?
This was in 2020 towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like we went for after the lockdown opened, we did our I was doing a residency, he went for a natural building workshop. So, and that's where we already had decided that we want to do something like this
Mm-hmm.
and made up our mind in some ways, but we did not have a plan or we did not have any anything to look forward to basically.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, I mean, just coming back from our respective residencies and workshops, obviously him doing the natural building workshop inspired us to work on the mud house, the cob house, as probably an excuse to move to the mountains as well, like in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because again, the idea was to create a space for people, something similar to what we had experienced in our travels, the warmth that we had received in our travels. We wanted to put that back in and like create something with the community and enjoy while doing it, but also to show that this is possible as like the mud house itself and the myths around it. So yeah, it was 2020, and then we moved in 2021 March.
So yeah,
Wow.
it's never an overnight event. It has been a process. So it's very
Mhm.
difficult to, pinpoint when exactly we did that. But you could imagine like 2020, it's when it started gathering steam, and 21 is when like we were standing on the roof in the mountains in the village holding our cup of coffees and like looking into each other's eyes and realizing, okay, now we're finally living the dream. So we are quite grateful and blessed and privileged to have been able to do that.
Yeah, so
Wow.
probably between October 2020 to March 21, like we did not have a land, we did not know the location, we we did not know how it would happen, we did not know if we could even do it or are capable of it. But in those few months, things just started to the dots connected, and like eventually we were there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So let's come to that actually. Like, would you like to share that how did you find the place for starting this project?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of stories associated with like finding the place, but if I could just, like try and tell you in a nutshell, is that we got lucky in a way, but to get lucky also, I think one has to like tell people what you're looking for, and then only you get lucky, because that's how it happened. We told our family that we wanted to make this movie, convinced them by showing different documentaries, movies of people who had already done this, and they were in a shock initially, but then they understood our unwavering passion and conviction in making this move. So our dad reached out to his friend, Mr. Deepak, who really came as an angel in disguise in our life. And so he was already located in Rishikesh, and he's the one responsible, like for us living this dream. So we actually had just gone window shopping, knowing that the land prices were soaring high after COVID, and we were quite pessimistic about the whole situation, whether how pragmatic this move and this life would be when you had limited resources.
Right.
But thanks to him, he offered his land, and we got to borrow his land, where we are now like building the mud house. And eventually, because we wanted to build the mud house, then we had to, look for a place in the village itself, and like to find that place and gaining the trust of the village's story is like a whole podcast episode in itself. So that's how like basically we got to know the land because of our father's friend now, who is our friend and mentor and
Hmm.
guardian.
That's wonderful. I mean, amazing. So, this mud house, would you like to paint a picture of this mud house? Like, what is the setting and what are the views like for our listeners to imagine? And I'm sure that, like, afterwards we can mention where they can check out this mud house so that, like, they can visualize it better. But just for our listeners to imagine.
So the location, as we mentioned, that it is from the last motorable point, it's like a 15-20 minutes of a hike,
Hmm.
and you reach this village which is hugged from all four sides by mountains. You can see the Ganga flowing through the mountains, and yeah, I mean, you see green flush mostly in the monsoons, at least. Mountains, and then beautiful sunsets towards the Ganga. What else is there?
Yeah, I mean, the site is at the
Yeah.
edge of the hill with like valley behind, and like in front of you, you have almost like a 180-degree view of the Ganges. And it's a pretty tiny site, but since it is at the edge of the hill, it comes alive. And if we could like paint a picture of the house, You basically enter through an outdoor kitchen where you helped us made a wonderful, beautiful cob oven. You should definitely put a like picture or link for the picture of the cob oven. And
Yeah,
so
definitely.
that's where you enter, and then it's based on the concept of a tiny house. And the whole idea behind the house was that it should be sculptural, it should be, like very site specific and responding to the site. And we made using the co-op technique,
Mm-hmm.
which is very democratic, inclusive, very sculpture, flexible, artisanal. So you can see a lot of feminine curves within the building, and we have an arched doorway through which we enter the house. And basically, because it's a tiny house, so you directly enter into the kitchenette, and then you have a mezzanine, a loft above for the children to stay. And the roof is a beautiful reciprocal roof, which is like a resi frame. You can imagine it as a shutter of the camera with different, wooden beams locked in that position,
Hmm.
self-supporting, creating a skylight in the center. There's a living room with a fireplace, some cozy reading nooks or love seats, whatever you'd like to call them. And then you enter in the sleeping room, and there is a wonderful, beautiful bathroom with an open to skylight, not totally open, but yeah, like with the skylight shower. So the whole house has been planned in terms of verbs and not like nouns. So like a cooking space, a sleeping space, because we are humans in action. So
Yeah,
it is very much inspired by the book Hand Sculpted House by Ianto and Linda. And so this house is also hand sculpted, and we call it the House of Biomaterials.
Yeah.
yeah. So, would you like to expand on House of Biomaterials? Why do you call it?
So with Tiny Farm Lab, other than the mud house itself, we work with a lot of different natural materials,
Mm-hmm.
as we call them biomaterials, materials made out of seaweed, mycelium, the
Coffee waste.
yeah, the fungal network of the mushrooms is called mycelium if someone doesn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
The coffee waste, eggshell powder, orange peel powder, anything, most things from the kitchen, and you can convert them into products like lampshades, stool tops, even some kind of ceramics like eggshell ceramics, and create some functional tools like kitchen tools with them. So, yeah, all of those, some driftwood can be used to make different things. So, yeah, the idea is that the house would incorporate all of these things
Mm-hmm.
done by different designers and artists. Like the lampshade could be done by one artist.
Hmm.
The ceramic crockery or the stool made, the furniture, whatever little furniture is there, it can be designed by some other artist, and eventually it's a museum in the form of a house where you live in, so you experience the artworks while you stay in it, and also understand the importance of using these materials and understand the value and the properties of these materials, that these can actually replace materials that are causing issues in the world right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So,
eventually, we'd like to make a coffee table book of all of these artists as a collection to make it accessible for the people who are experiencing as well. And
that's a good
to,
idea.
of course, yeah, and to, of course, support the artists and designers in some ways.
That's nice. So, I have a
Oh,
couple of questions that I feel are sort of important ones. So, first is, what are those factors which majorly boost this confidence that yes, now I can build a mud house. Because like even as an architect, like right after coming out of a college, or like even after practicing in offices, like we are not I am not so confident in building a whole house on my own, that too from an unconventional technique. And I'm sure there are many like me. So how did you get that kind of confidence, or like, or rather that kind of learning?
Well, I would like to say that the society and civilization has done a wonderful job taking us away from our intuitive sense and taking away like our basic necessities from us and like outsourcing it. So even being an architect, to some extent, I question my profession because shelter is something which is so basic. Like every insect, animal, like bird, it comes intuitively to them. And if we are claiming to be the most intelligent species, this should
Right.
have like come to us so easily, and it did for the longest time. But now I think we have outsourced all our needs, shelters, or we are not personalizing them enough. I'm not saying this sitting on a higher horse. Like even in Delhi, we live in a house which is like a box shaped. So
Hmm.
even we did not have a choice. But I mean, it starts with asking the right questions. And so we asked this question to ourselves, like, why can't we build a house? And I think it's even more difficult for an architect because if somebody being a non-architect wants to rediscover their instincts, they can go and do that. I mean, there are pros and cons, but for an architect to build is one thing. To build with mud, first you have to go through a lot of unlearning that happens because you have been conditioned to build with like concrete, steel, and that's what they teach you in the college. Even the structure designers, all they work like with the same materials, even though this material is just like 120 years old. And I mean, it's surprising like how we've so like forgotten the materials that were used and still are being used by majority of the world's population and for the majority of the human timeline in this universe. So I think
Right.
confidence comes with knowledge by asking the right questions. Like it is actually common sense, but common sense is not so common because we've been greenwashed, we've been brainwashed. And if we look at the logic, I think if the house, as they say, like if the house has a good hat and good boot, it can last. So it's also to do with like some poor designing. That's why some houses do fall down, and then people think that it's kacha or like a sign of poverty.
Mhm.
But there's so many problems in a cement house as well. So the question in both, using both the materials, comes down to like how well you have designed and executed the building. And confidence, you have to build confidence, like it's like trust, it happens over time. So you have to work with that material, you have to understand the material, and then there is this intuitive sense that will guide you like what is right or wrong.
Hmm. That's a beautiful answer, actually. It makes me think. So, moving on to my second question. I've always seen you like building this mud house, but I always wonder, how did you plan ahead? Because you are also learning as you build. There are a lot of unforeseen unknowns. So that's my question. Like, how do you plan ahead? How do you know?
Well, honestly speaking, I mean, we're not boasting, but we saw, of course, like attending the National Building Workshop gave us that hands-on experience, but in bits and parts. But personally, I am very guilty of consuming too much content when I have to do something and doing a lot of research. It can also be seen as procrastination, but we saw, both of us actually saw a lot of videos and read a lot of books on national building before even starting or even having the land. So
Mm-hmm.
while building, it was more like self-doubting and the inertia of action more than the lack of knowledge. So it was more about actually doing it and gaining confidence. And of course, there are many things that you figure out on site because those are site specific things. But this was not something that we were doing for the first time. And the whole idea is that this is not rocket science, anybody can do it. And so, yeah, I mean, some things we figured out as we like went, and of course, we doubted every step unless and until we did it. And somehow, luckily, we got the right people at the right time. You were there for the copper when you helped us in it. Also, like helped us in the model for the reciprocal roof. Then there was this sweet girl, Leah, who had already had experience with reciprocal roof. She arrived at the right time. So, like we had luck always on our side with right people coming to help us at the right time. And yeah, I think I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So moving on to the third question. It can be a personal question. You can choose to answer in as much depth as you want. So it is kind of an important one too. So how did you manage all of it financially? Because so many of us want to do something of our own, but not having enough money sort of, becomes a problem.
Right. I think initially we also came from the scarcity mindset of doing something like this. And Ansh was always a freelancer working on his new media art and also doing things like website design, branding, logo projects, and other like graphic design projects, and a lot of exhibitions around the world also. I was coming from a conventional architecture background. So even before we took this leap or I quit my job, like we always emphasize that it was not an overnight event, and we had planned it to some extent. Like I knew that okay, I need at least little bit cushion. Although the initial plan was to use that cushion for traveling if lockdown did not happen, but
Mhm.
you had to plan for that also because I was going to quit the job. So I actually planned my savings. We did a time audit, like how we are spending our time. We did a financial audit together, and we realized we were spending a lot on Zomato. So we cut down like all these food delivery apps because that was a. I'm not saying that you should like not go and have coffees in the cafe because that is scarcity mindset. But yeah, wherever like we saw that it was also unhealthy. So
Mhm.
we cut those things down. I'm not asking anybody like to cut things down which brings them joy, but you can see like the unnecessary things. So one step was that because we were going to do such a move. Apart from that, we had some remote design projects that we were working on, but honestly speaking, like the budget we had in mind and the kind of thought processes and plans we had for tiny farm lab that like we'll build the house in the first year and we'll have a cafe running around and we'll be having movie screenings in the second month. We will be selling breads, sourdough breads by third month. But when we actually went there, like everything went for a toss. The budgets overshot. There is a even a saying that you'll always end up spending twice as much money and thrice as much time that you imagined because things happen so slowly in the mountains. The
Right.
second wave hit us. We realized that bridge washes away during the monsoon. There's even an elephant in the village. The weather was so unpredictable, and that overshot our budget. And we actually had to, like, we had a choice of whether to like take a private loan or something, but then we realized like it's better. We were reading this book, Hand Sculpted House, and they mentioned that it's always, better to have taken like borrow money from your friends or family at like low interest or zero interest. So we did like borrow money like for from a family, and then slowly things started rolling, and we did workshops at Tiny Farm Lab, even outside Tiny Farm Lab. And took a workshop in Bangalore, and we just completed two workshops. Then we hosted Airbnb experiences. So I won't say that we have been like really successful on that front, because we were also very skeptical in selling things, because we saw selling as something evil, like against our values and ethics. And of course we if we could like do things differently next time, we would definitely would have loved to create some cash flows, because we were so hell bent on doing things sustainably only, and we were too idealistic that no, we won't put a tent and open it as a camp like how every Delhi hide who comes to Rishikesh is doing that. So maybe that's where we lost some money, I could say. But overall, like going slow, doing it with volunteers was a conscious choice. And
Mhm.
I think it will pay in the long term, because we believe in the long term thinking and playing long, infinite, zero sum games with long term people like you. So I hope
Thank you.
everything works out at the end.
Thank you. Okay. How important it is to feel that relation with the material itself, especially like intuitive material like mud.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the biggest reasons that we wanted to do something like this, because we wanted to work with our hands. We wanted to feel the creation, or like to do things that we can actually feel with our own hands.
Mhm.
So, mud, of course, being such a forgiving material, we have like used it since our childhood, even if it's like sand castles or just playing in the mud and
Right.
creating just mud balls.
Yeah.
So we, even if you're sitting in the garden or there's wet soil around and you're sitting with friends, you'll just pick up some in your fist and start to make a ball out of it.
Yeah.
So, so it is anyways a very intuitive material, and it is forgiving in the sense that if you make a mistake, you can add or subtract very easily. It is a very, you can mold it in whatever form you want, and that has its own advantages. It is very therapeutic for sure.
Yes, it
You
is.
can, so I mean, you have experienced this like while working with someone around, you just keep talking to them about the life, you connect so much. While it is also sometimes a monotonous process, like a lot of it, because you're
Mhm.
building the wall. So you
Mhm.
converse a lot, you dance a lot while making cob, right? So there's a lot of fun, and you, I think you build a lot of those connections with people while working, because throwing the balls, that laughter when you miss that ball, we have had a lot of those moments, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's fun. It is something that comes naturally to us, and it is really forgiving and therapeutic. Yeah, if you can add something.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add one line to what he said, is that you feel that you are transforming the mud, but in a way, it is transforming
Yeah,
you as an individual. So,
Wow.
very much.
Wow. And I remember this one time when like I was working with you guys as volunteer, and me and Ansh were making the mix the batch, getting ready for, to build a wall. Then I asked Raghav that how do you know the proportions of like mixing the soil? Because there were like two type of soils, and there were like some calculation he was saying that like put two buckets of this and one bucket of that. So I just asked him that how did you decide on proportions? So he's like, it's not a thumb rule. It's not a thumb rule that a book can teach you. It's a feeling. When you touch it, then only you'll know it, and you will understand it eventually when you give it enough time. And that stuck with me. I mean, that stuck with me like forever. Uh, and like that's what I felt too later on.
Mm.
So that was
Yeah, I mean,
amazing.
books can only teach you certain extent because every soil, every geolocation is so different that you can't. Of course, there are some thumb rules like what could be the proportion of sand and clay, but in the end, everywhere the sand is different, clay is different. So in the end, it comes down to the feel and the muscle memory. Of course, you need to do some test and sample yours, but you'll every batch also become comes out to be different sometimes because there's so many people working on it and you can't micromanage everyone, but you'll get to know how it is feeling in your feet, and like a chef you can tell, yeah, the dough is not proper or
Yeah. So moving on to, as far as I understand, that it is very important to build relations with neighbors and the community you live in. So how is that for you?
It is, of course, very important in the sense that when we did go there, we were, or in a lot of ways, still are outsiders.
Mhm.
So those are the villagers are the people. I mean, it's a very small village again. Like at a time, there are probably 20, 25 people, including all the volunteers that are at our place.
Mhm.
So it is the villagers that have taught us so much. It is the villagers that have supported us in building, in like living there, to understand, from getting in the beginning, from getting like water from the canal, to how how confidently you ride the scooty down, or when to go where, about the types of species there are, what kind of fruits were there before, and what grows in the farm right now, and yeah, using the tools,
Right.
all the tools I think Dadi taught us to use mostly. So, I mean, villagers, their support has been obviously immense, and that relationship, because I think for the first few months we were just living there and we did not start building anything. So it was a relationship that we built over those months, that it is not that we are here to get something out of it. It was actually we wanted to live that life, and they were our new neighbors. It was not like we were positioned there for making the house so everything would be
Yes.
transaction. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you have mentioned Dadi, so you have to tell a little bit about Dadi as well.
Yeah.
Dadi is an incredible personality for starters, and
Yeah.
she's so full of life and energy. And I mean, people who I could say that many people find her the life and spirit of
Yeah.
tiny farm lab or the village. Of course, she can be dadi, like the granny types, poking sometimes when you're not doing some things properly. But apart from that, it's wonderful having her company. And yeah, it was more like she, you know, walked us around the whole village, teaching us all her indigenous wisdom that she gathered throughout her life. And we still have her support when we are here in Delhi, because we come to Delhi during monsoons as the village gets disconnected. And
Mm-hmm.
we just got a call from her day before that the elephant had visited our mud house, and so we get all the information from her, and she takes care of everything possibly, and she still have more energy than most of the millennials, which came like to Tiny Farm Lab, and I'm sure you have seen it firsthand.
Yes.
So yeah.
So, how is this project going to help the locals and the community there?
So for starters, the project already employed more than 15 people from the village and local areas of Rishikesh.
Hmm.
So it already created that kind of employment and knowledge sharing about this kind of building technique. But the bigger idea and the higher goal of the project was also to reintroduce them to their instinctive skills and reinstill the confidence in their vernacular architecture. Although it's not pretty similar to how they used to build, because they used to build with stone and slate roofs, but it's very difficult to get slate now these days, since it has been banned. And
Hmm.
even the stone takes a lot of time, and we are living in an age of instant gratification. So the idea was for them to gain confidence again when they saw that people from more than 18 countries are like coming to help build this mud house. It will definitely slowly change their psychology, because they enjoyed living in their vernacular houses, but maybe it was the TV, maybe it was the building policies that, or availability of materials, or the idea of progress happens only when you build a pakka makan. So they had to slowly shift to these cement houses, which become so hot in summers and don't breathe, and they don't have the personal touch. There are no honeybees that come and live there, coexisting with them how they used to do in their vernacular houses. So they do acknowledge that fact. And going forward, we hope that after seeing this house, they also try and make these kind of houses. And you saw what happened in Himachal recently, and
Yes.
Uttarakhand also faces this dual challenge of climate change and migration. So we hope to create sustainable model for ecotourism, how you could do it by, it could be for profit for people, but as well as for planet. So that's the goal going forward, and hopefully we could create a bio art village where we have maybe pottery, a mycelium dry lab, 3D
That's pretty cool.
printing, so like cross stitching technology, art, science, and design, and maybe create employment opportunities for the women. For example, creating some baskets using local fibers. So we really have to explore the materials of the bioregion and create symbiotic bioregional economies. So that's the long-term goal, and we are taking baby steps towards it.
That's good. So, how does your typical day look like if there is one? And what keeps you motivated every day?
Generally, we wake up around 5:36. Whatever the work we need to do on our laptops, we try to finish that, mails or art, or I mean whatever that you're working towards, the podcast editing and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, around 9, everyone is almost done with breakfast, all the volunteers and So we start moving towards the site, which is like 150 meters away.
Mm-hmm.
And then we work from 9 till 9:30. It's not, obviously there's no fixed time. So from 9:30 to 12:31 we work on the site, come back for lunch, rest for an hour or two, then go back to the site, work for a few more hours until uh, the sun is out.
Okay.
Then, yeah, then we come back, cook together,
Sing songs
sing
with
songs
you and Jamie.
with you and Jamie, yeah, and talk amongst all of us, share stories. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a very long day.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
talking about motivation, we think that motivation is perishable, and to build such a structure, you need discipline. So, irrespective of the fact that we had motivation or no motivation, we had to,
Yeah.
show up every day despite whatever was happening in our personal lives or however the weather was, because we were always running against time. And the favorite sentence in the village is kab banega. When will it be ready? So we have to finish it as quickly as possible, because we lose 4 months of the year to monsoon, and to build momentum again once you lose it is quite a task. So discipline is what is needed after you had curry chawal made by Dadi in the afternoon. To wake up from your afternoon siesta nap is like, waking up from coffin. But we do that, and that's how we've been rolling.
Okay.
Nice. So, what is it like to build your own community and keep on growing it?
I mean, it's again, it comes from the fact that we have enjoyed being part of such communities,
Mm-hmm.
and we always wanted to be around like-minded individuals. So it does kind of come naturally to at least welcome like-minded individuals. But of course, there's a lot of different things that go into it, managing different people from around the world, different people with different backgrounds, different personalities,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, mostly it's a breeze. Sometimes it does require some work, but I think it is worth it at the end. Yeah, like to build that community, share stories, share knowledge, share cultures. Yeah, and sharing such a beautiful creation with them every day. Yeah.
And we
So,
realize that happiness doesn't only come from progress, but it also comes from giving, and that we wanted to give whatever limited knowledge we had. And as they talk about the connections in a ecosystem or biodiversity in permaculture, we thought we cannot do it alone, like we cannot do it in our isolated creative silos.
Right.
So we thought to create as many connections as possible. So we started introducing different people, friends who were like-minded to each other, so that at least there's some sort of microeconomy going on, or at least we can give a shout out on Instagram, or promote each other's event. And because in today's time, when we are thinking of moving from sustainable futures to regenerative futures, we need collaboration and not competition. So we thought how maybe we could create big change by creating lots of tiny changes, but creating multiple connections among people. So that's how we've grown to a wonderful tiny farm friends community. And if people listening to this resonate with the thought process and idea, and they would like to be part of it, we have WhatsApp groups, Discord channels, and we do have meetups, so they can maybe DM us on Instagram for the link or whatever.
Yes, we'll put the link in the description.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you.
what are your future plans for Tiny Farm Lab?
This is one thing that we thought that we'll really sort this out this time when we take a break, because we are quite ambitious for creating plans for Tiny Farm Lab, to the extent that we had many balls in the air, like juggling through different tasks. But now we think ourselves as catalysts, and we believe that to create healthier planet and healthier life for people, our role is of creating experiences and giving people the right resources to go and create those regenerative circular futures. So we are focusing more now on educating people about these kind of buildings, bio-based materials, and also creating a space where they can come and learn about these materials as well as experiment with these materials.
Okay.
And apart from that, yeah, we do have a podcast, and we plan to host more residencies. And at the same time, we see that there's a scope by like collaborating with builders and developers who have thinking of creating sustainable and circular homes. So we would love to create cabins in the wild using natural materials. So that is on the design front. Keep researching new bio-based materials, create some products and artwork that we're already doing, and also create more symbiotic bioregional economies, identifying the materials in the bioregion, working with them, then see how we can collaborate with some women NGOs that we already work with and create employment opportunities for them, and how we can create these decentralized models which could be replicated in other parts of the world, where we could find similar material, for example, banana fiber or lantana. So the idea is to work with invasive species, to work with agriculture waste, how these could be the materials of tomorrow. So to summarize it, like research as well as create products, have residencies, and also do some design consultancy.
Right. So our podcast has come to an end where I would like to end it with if you have any last piece of advice for the people who are willing to take transition like you did and do good for the environment.
I mean, if you believe in something and you believe that you can help for a better world and work towards the problem of climate change, then you should surely take those steps and put it out to the world again, like as you mentioned. Put it out to your friends, put it out to the world as much possible, and you will find the right people to show you the direction and maybe sometimes even a new path.
Right.
So, yeah, probably that. And do not forget to that happiness is still one of the more important things. So, to do whatever we do, like we should probably choose things that do make us happy and content in some ways.
Right.
And what do you think, Raghav?
So I would say, firstly, it starts with the right mindset. You have to believe that you can do it, and see what is limiting you, and then talk about it. Feed your curiosities. Start wherever you are. You don't need to like move to the mountain to do something that you can do in the city as well. So
Right.
start from there, have a longer vision because it's a process, and fall
Mhm.
in love with the process because it is more important than the outcome. And take it one step at a time, baby steps, and you'll slowly get there. And there will be a lot of challenges. It requires a lot of courage because, in a way, it is a rebellion thing. But if we can do it, I'm sure you can do it better.
Yeah, I believe that because, personally, you two inspired me a lot. Like after meeting you, I've realized more things, and I found courage to take such steps to, to do what I really like, and like to do more of that. So that is really true what Ansh said, that like find happiness in what you do, or like find something that makes you happy and do that, and eventually you will find people or like meet people along your path, and that way they will eventually help you. So that's
Yeah,
true.
you inspire us as well, Bharat, with all the things that you do and envision to do.
I'm just trying, I'm just following your path, kind of. So yeah, we inspire each other, I guess. Inspiration is mutual.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, it is.
So I had an amazing podcast with you guys, and thanks for agreeing to do this podcast with me. And thank you so much once again. And where can people best reach out to you?
Instagram, Tiny Farm Lab, or our website, Tiny Farm Lab.
Yeah,
Okay.
So that's the best way. You can DM us, and we would love to hear from you. Come, just say hi.
Okay.
yeah,
So thank you so much, Ansh and Raghav.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
yeah, it was
It
amazing.
always is.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that was Raghav and Ansh, and every single time I talk to them, it left me with positive energy and new things to find out, new things to discover, and new questions to be answered in my life. So I hope you like this episode, and I'm hoping that you'd give us feedback on our email ID friendsofthemountains.info@gmail.com. And if you haven't checked out our last episode yet, it was a story of Ayan Biswas about him living with last Potter's family of Ladakh, helping the communities, and rerouting the historical printing processes in the mountains. So don't forget to check that out as well. You can follow us on Instagram for exciting updates at Friends of the Mountains. Also, this podcast is available on other platforms as well, like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. You can reach out to us on our Instagram page at Friends of the Mountains. You'll find the relevant links in the podcast description. I'm your host Bharat signing off. I hope to see you next time.